Hello everyone. Today I will be featuring a very special treat indeed. A first glance at the Tier 10 Royal Navy battleship, the Conqueror. Now note that this is still a work in progress. For example, I still have the heel that is going to get nerfed, but I still have the very, in my opinion, overpowered heel. So that does of course kind of affect the review in itself, because it's hard, not that easy to predict how it does without the heal, since we don't know the exact numbers of the upcoming heal. What basically this heal is like the Royal Navy heal, a Royal Navy cruiser heal that is, and it is due to be nerfed. Meaning that what they're doing is basically they're speeding up the way it works, that it heals you really fast, but it has a much lower active time, meaning it doesn't heal you for as much as it does currently. The current one heals you for like almost 40k health, which of course means that it's incredibly strong, but the upcoming one, we don't know the exact details yet, so it makes it a bit hard to give a definitive opinion about the Conqueror, since there is some speculation involved, so keep that in mind. Now, first of all, what you might notice, of course, is that the Conqueror has two different sets of guns. We have the 490mm, 12 of them, or we can use the 457. It says the same on both. That's just, once again, it's a work in progress, so they simply haven't updated the UI. So we can use 12 419, or we can use 8 457. Now, I've been pretty much almost entirely opting for the 490mm guns, simply because, well, let's look at the advantages, the differences between these guns. Let's mount the 419s that I usually use. Come on, please UI, thank you. Right, so what exactly does upgrading to 457mm give us? Well, first of all, it costs us 1 gun per turret. That is straight up a 50% gun loss. But what does it give us in return? It gives us a nice chunk of HE shell damage, something like what, 12-13% of that. It gives us 15% fire chance. It gives us a nice chunk of AP damage as well, all once again about the same amount. And it gives us a very small amount of AP shell velocity while costing us some HE shell velocity. Okay, those are the trade-offs. Let's start with the first one, HE fire chance. Well, first of all, if you use HE in a Conqueror or in any battleship, it's mostly to counter angled battleships on the enemy team. You want to use a different type of ammo because you don't want your shells to bounce, so you try to set fires. Now, every tier 10 in the ship has something called a fire resistance coefficient. What this fire resistance coefficient means is that the higher tier your ship, the higher of a resistance to having fire started on you have. For example, every tier 10 ship has a 50% fire coefficient. So this means, of course, that the actual fire chance is not 63% when we're shooting at a target, but it's half of that, which is of course 31.5%. What this of course also means is that these guns that have the default 490mm that have 48% actually have 24%. Suddenly when you start comparing them, you realize you got 24% fire chance versus 31.5%. Now, I doubt I have to explain the math to you, but increasing your fire chance by 7.5%, 7.5, but losing 50% of your guns is not a very good trade-off when it comes to starting fires, especially of course since we have to count in dispersion as well, which means that, well, I think you understand the point. The actual benefits of starting fires with these, the increase in fire chance is not enough in my book to compensate for just how much gun power you lose. So the HE in itself makes it fairly useless. Let's look at the AP performance then. Of course, the big difference would naturally be an increase in penetration, but let's say tier 10 battleships already have very good penetration. I mean, 490mm guns are certainly no slouches, and the penetration is very good. So obviously what we would be looking at is trying to match Yamato's incredible overmatch performance. If we look at Yamato, of course, it has 460mm guns, and the special thing about the Yamato is the capacity to overmatch bows. So if battleships try to angle bow on towards you, you can just shoot them through the bow and penetrate them. That's overmatching in this game. But can we actually overmatch anything important with 457? And you see, this is where wargaming has been pretty sneaky. For those that watched my overmatch mechanic vid, know that the way to calculate overmatch is you multiply the armor by 14.3 and you get the value, or you get the caliber you need to overmatch. Now, of course, the single most common armor in the game, the single most common bow armor in the game, let's turn on the bow armor, single most common bow armor is 32 millimeters. Let's see, Montana, you see 32, I think does the Yamato have 32? Yamato has 32. This is the single most common bow armor in the game, 32 millimeters. Pretty much almost all high tier battleships have their noses comprised of this 32 millimeter armor. So obviously this is the one value that we should be aiming to overmatch in order for this 400 and for these higher caliber guns to be worth it. And if we take 14.3 times 32 millimeter, we realize that the caliber needed to overmatch this armor is 457.6 millimeters. So what this means is that 457 millimeter guns will not overmatch 32. They will overmatch 31.5. They will overmatch 31, but 32 will bounce your shells. And this is probably quite intentional from wargaming, since they didn't make it 458, but exactly 457. So what does this fundamentally mean? It means that I have seen absolutely zero reason to run the higher caliber guns, because the trade-off in fire chance is worse, and you don't get any sort of overmatch bonus to make up for the loss in guns, and I don't think the maximum AP damage is worth the trade-off in guns either. So my main spec, and the one I have been running with and the one I recommend, is the 12 gun spec, which is of course a bit boring because, well, we already have two other battleships that run these 4x3 types of setups, but fundamentally it is, in my opinion, the best one. But let's look at the performance of the guns in general. Overall, I have been very satisfied with the way these guns behave. The shell velocity is the slowest of them all, at 747 meters per second if you use the guns I recommend. But this of course allows you to get some excellent plunging fire volleys, which has led to some very consistent damage in general. And the shell velocity is slow, which means of course you have to lead a bit, or a fair amount to be fair, but you have great dispersion. I think it might have some of the best dispersion. I think the only one that really beats it in this dispersion is going to be the Yamato. I'm not entirely certain how close the Montana gets, but it feels like the Conqueror really, this plunging fire, especially against the US battleships, has proven to be extremely strong, because, well, of course they have a lowered citadel and you have plunging fire, so you're pretty much the natural counter. Then again, Royal Navy battleships also have a very lowered citadel, so you kind of tend to counter your own line as well. It does help though when people angle, especially cruisers, if they angle against you, you can still do some absolutely devastating volley thanks to the nature of the shells themselves. And I haven't really gotten a citadel on a German battleship yet, but I would assume that because of the nature of the shells, it would also turn out to be quite strong against German battleships, because after all, their turtleback is only really vulnerable to plunging fire. So it wouldn't surprise me to see some sort of big citadel volleys against German battleships at some point. I haven't played the ship enough to start getting those, and I don't exactly know what distance is optimal for causing it, but in theory, I would suspect the Royal Navy battle line, especially the Conqueror, would be good at citadeling those. Let's see, is this guy going to show himself? Well, I can talk about another reason. Well, you see actually here that I switched to HE, and that's another thing that I've actually quite enjoyed on the Conqueror. The increase in fire chance is still big, even on these guns. If you consider the Montana has a fire chance of 36% on its normal guns, on the 12 guns, the Conqueror has a fire chance of 48%. Now this of course gets cut in half against tier 10s, but it's still a large enough fire chance to make switching to HE quite often a very viable tactic against angle targets. You might not be able to overmatch them like a Yamato can, but switching to HE allows you to create some really devastating HE and fire pressure against targets that attempt to angle against you. So this is the one thing I like about this battleship, is that it does encourage you to actively switch ammo type, because the HE is certainly no joke. Especially against unsaturated battleships, you can do some truly devastating volleys. Of course, combined with the great accuracy, aka the great dispersion, this allows you to be a very, very annoying battleship to fight. Of course, if they do give broadside, well, you saw the AP volley on the Montana. Obviously, AP is always going to be superior against any sort of broadside targets, but against angle targets, the HE is certainly very, very useful. And that's another guy dead to HE. I mean, it does feel a bit weird to actually recommend using it, but against angle targets, normally I only really bothered using HE in the Montana, but now we have a new ship where it's valuable. Another thing worth noting though is plunging fire plus good dispersion plus good stealth equals, well, if a DD doesn't avoid in time when your slow shells come his way, you can do some absolutely ridiculous damage. Yes, that was 22,000 damage on a Kaba at 12 kilometers. With, of course, the AP plunging shell type allows you to quite easily get penetrations. Those that play competitive know that this is what North Carolinas tend to do to DDs, while the Royal Navy line is very much the same. Health pool wise, the ship obviously has the lowest health pool of them all, 82.9k. In return though, well, it has the special heal, but we don't really know exactly how the heal is going to behave right now, since right now we have kind of the overpowered heal, as I mentioned earlier, so that is something we'll have to speculate on a bit later once we actually know how it will behave. However, the basic idea of the ship is obviously that, unlike the other ships that survive based on additional tankiness, the Conqueror survives based on its excellent concealment, and 11.1 concealment is of course incredibly strong. Now, one of the problems that's no doubt going to arise is people will be using this 24.3 kilometer excellent range. People are going to use this to snipe in this ship. We've seen it happen in all the battleships, and people are going to misplay this ship just the way they misplay all the other battleships, and they're going to sit back and snipe, even though of course the best way to play this ship is to utilize this absolutely excellent concealment to get surprisingly close to the enemy and then open up on them from stealth and surprise them. But we are unlikely to see much of that happening because, well, I saw exactly what happened to the so-called brawling line, aka the German BB line. People just sat back and, well, people still just sit back and snipe in that line. They don't understand how the line is supposed to be played at all, and considering this line has even better range, expect to see exactly the same happen with the Conqueror. Now, torpedo protection is pretty crap at 30% at tier 10. Even though it has some great survivability thanks to the current heal, probably pretty good survivability thanks to the next heal as well. Having this low an HP pool means that the tier 10 torps that tend to do a lot of damage, especially IGN ones, really cripple you. Eating 2 or 3 torps puts you way below half HP, which doesn't happen to any other battleship, but to this one, you get really crippled by torpedoes, and you can get bursted down before you have a time to do anything. So torpedoes are obviously a massive weakness, and considering this is one of the few ships that doesn't have any sort of spotter or fighter plane, it means that you are especially vulnerable. There's of course no radar, no hydro, no nothing like that, which I of course like. Thank you Wargaming for not adding more cruiser consumables to battleships. We really didn't need that. But that of course means that getting vigilance might be a highly recommendable move, unless of course you are confident enough in your positioning to always dodge them. Now, maneuverability wise, it kind of sits in the middle. It's pretty fast at 31 with speed flag. Note this is with speed flag. If we turn on the speed flag, we'll probably get a bit more of an accurate statement. 29.5 compared to Montana 30, and I think Kurfus is 20, no, it's 30 as well. So it kind of sits exactly in the middle of them all. It's fairly close to them. It's not fast, it's not too slow. Turning circle, once again, not really the best. It beats the Kurfürst. I think it loses to the... No, it's the same as the Montana, but it probably loses to the Yamato. Yeah, it loses to the Yamato. So, once again, kind of middle of the pack. The rudder shift is okay at 17.3. That's without the rudder shift module. And I'll explain later why I'm running damage control instead of faster rudder shift on this one. So overall, this is obviously a stealthy. It handles very much the same as the others. It's quite stealthy, but it does have some additional bonuses. First of all, if we show the citadel, well, actually, let's start with the Montana. The Montana, of course, had a lowered citadel quite recently, and you can see how low it is. It practically sits right at the water line, the lowered citadel. In comparison to Yamato, of course, the citadel comes up quite high on the ship, almost halfway up the broadside here. And then we look at the Conqueror, and you realize it's even lower than Montana's citadel. Yep, it has an even lower, it has below the waterline citadel, which means plunging fire is really the strongest tool against this ship, which is of course other Royal Navy battleships, or in general just a long range plunging fire is of course especially strong, because this one does not have a turtle back, so it just has this block of armor around it. Now, at first you might go, oh my god, then it's going to be so overpowered. Well, actually, it just means that it can brawl fairly well against Montana and Kurfürst. In general, though, of course, HP pool becomes, when neither can Citadel the other, HP pool, of course, becomes a pretty important thing. And, well, the Conqueror kind of loses in HP pool to both of them. The secondary armament is very unimpressive as well. You only have 16 secondaries. And while they shoot HE, of course, that is not really too much compared to the other competition, like Montana has 20, and if we go to the Kurfürst, we see it has, what, 28 of them. So in brawling power, it's hard, almost impossible to Citadel, but it does lose in other aspects. The turret traverse is quite good with Jack Dunkirk, 40 seconds, 40.2. Let's see, what does actually Montana reach? 38.3, so Montana does slightly beat it, and 39 on Grosse Kurfürst. Once again, it's kind of middle of the pack, but yeah, good brawler, but I wouldn't straight up call it the best brawler because, well, the issues that I mentioned. Now, these are some good strengths. I might actually, one more thing to mention about strengths. The AA is very good on this ship. In fact, looking at the AA, it loses in long-range AA to the Montana, but the mid-range AA is actually significantly better than the Montanas, since you get two auras at 4.2 that combined deal over 420 DPS, and this is just with BFT on the captain. These can be increased to 5 km, and this one increased to 7.5 just by slotting the AA range module, which means in AA power this ship is going to be extremely hard to drop because it has very strong anti-air. The anti-air does seem to break quite easily though, but that kind of happens to everyone, so I don't think that's much of a valid argument. Armor in general, well, here we come to one of the big weaknesses of the Conqueror, one of the major weaknesses of this ship, and that is if we look at the armor. Let's turn on the outer armor. Now the broadside armor is quite good, 406, that's certainly no weakness. The bow is 32, which is very Montana, Yamato-esque. So Yamato can of course overmatch your nose, as I mentioned based on the calculation earlier. And now, the big issue here though, 32mm armor deck, upper broadside, fore-end deck, and stern. Everything is 32mm. For those that have watched my IFHE guide, know that this means that the Conqueror is extremely vulnerable to every single type of HE spam. This is, well, you know the Izuma. Everyone loves shooting at the Izuma because you do so much HE damage to the Izuma. Well, and you know what armor the Izuma has? You know what armor covers the entire Izuma ship? Here's a hint. It's exactly the same, 32mm all over. So obviously HE spam is going to be a huge issue for the Conqueror, and managing your concealment and being able to disengage when need be thanks to this low detectability is going to be extremely important if you get HE focused. So this ship certainly does have one major weakness that must be kept in mind, especially once again if we get into these brawling fights, because, well, secondaries are going to be doing a lot of damage and starting a lot of fires, especially if it's German secondaries. But overall, I do like the Conqueror quite a lot. I think it's a very fun ship. I've enjoyed playing it. I think it encourages ammo type switching quite a lot because of how strong the H is. It encourages because of the slow shell velocity. It encourages getting close and using the concealment to jump the enemy from close ranges. and because of the low HP pool, you kind of have to manage, you have to dart in and out, and it's one of the more active battleship playstyles. I think it requires the most from the user to make the most out of it, but I still think it's a very, very strong battleship, and a lot of fun to play, and honestly, as of now, it might be one of my favorite battleships as it is. Now, I am running Jack Dunkirk on this. I did recommend you guys should get Jack Dunkirk, and I highly recommend unlock, well, if you don't have him, well, no, you can't get him anymore. Well, I hope you did get him and level him up, because of course he brings some greatly needed bonuses. For example, Jack of all trades, 10% faster reload, especially with the HE weakness, being able to use your repair and your heal faster is fantastic. And of course, faster turret traverse, which is, in fact, without this captain, I wouldn't be able to match the Montana and Corfor's turret traverse, because this one gives that small edge. This small yellow line here indicates it's a special captain. Currently I'm running Superintendent, Concealment Expert, and AFT. Another option would be giving up AFT and getting fire prevention, but since I've been testing the AA in general and been fiddling with this ship, I've been running AFT as of now. I'm not entirely certain this is my final build, but this is a build that I have enjoyed using. Whether or not this will be final will of course depend on how the ship changes before release, since this is a test ship. And finally, an example of some gameplay against Royal Navy cruisers, which is actually one of the ships that get countered kind of the hardest by this ship. This small clip shows you an example of the things I've been able to pull off in this in the Conqueror in general with this increased concealment. For example, the enemy has no idea that I'm pushing into the camp. You can see all my team is all behind me. That's where they expect me to be. So this Neptune is happily sailing forward, even shooting, because he doesn't expect anyone to be able to fire at him. But of course, being able to use the incredible concealment of the Conqueror, I'm able to get the jump on him. Only now does he spot me just as I fire, and it's too late for him to even turn or react, and it's an instant devastating strike. So mastering different ways to use this concealment to surprise and ambush enemies is obviously going to be something worth learning. I mean, because it is a step up from any other tier 10 concealment in the game when it comes to battleships. Also, of course, well, you see the damage I take when I give too much broadside. Well, even angled you take a fair amount. Overall though, a good Conqueror player is going to be a real pain in the ass to play against, because if they know how to use the stealth to their advantage, you're gonna have a really hard time dealing with it. But right now, my overall impressions of the Conqueror is that I really like the ship. It has some very straightforward weaknesses. It has a lower HP pool, and it has a significantly lower HP pool. In fact, I mean, it's got like 20% less health than the Grosse Corfos, so that's pretty significant. Also, of course, the fact that this is 32mm armor all over, which means that you are especially vulnerable to all forms of HE spam. Right now, though, it has the ridiculous heal, which I'm glad that they nerfed, because the heal, of course, kind of takes away all these weaknesses. With the heal, the HE weakness isn't really that big of a deal, since you can out-heal the incoming damage, and the low HP pool isn't that big of a deal, because your effective HP pool is so massive thanks to the overpowered heal. But I am glad that they're nerfing it, because now it will have a very clear set of weaknesses. Of course, and there's the torpedo belt weakness as well. But overall, though, I like it. I like this ship. It brings forward a new playstyle. It doesn't have any gimmicky consumables, and it has a clear set of strengths, clear sets of weaknesses, and it encourages different ammo type switching, not just spam AP all day, not just spam HE all day either, but it encourages switching depending on the situation. So overall, this ship has been very enjoyable to play. And honestly, I'm looking forward to seeing how they do tune out the heal in the end, and I will of course make an updated commentary then, because I cannot really give any sort of super final call until I know what kind of heal we're talking about. In its current state, I think it's too strong, but I already know that the heal is getting nerfed, so it remains to be seen what the final product will end up being. Anyway, that was all for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it.